Rescue Me. A short story collection. By S.R. Marks. Does This Bring You Joy? Was first published in Wicked Women by New England Horror Writers, 2020. Northanger After Dark was first published in A Little More Northanger Park by Illuminated Myth Publishing, 2021. I had a plan in 2020. Even before the pandemic hit, I had a plan. To be fair, I always have a plan. Sometimes I stick to it, other times it changes. I think we all know that it changed in March of 2020. I planned, as I wondered how long I would be stuck in the house, to write short stories and submit them to anthologies. I successfully did that with one story, but the rest sat unedited on my computer. It turned into a way to cope with the stress of the pandemic. The collection grew, but I was avoiding doing more with them. I kept telling myself the edits were overwhelming. In January 2021, as I got through my own block, I realized there were enough stories for their own collection. That is what you're going to read in these pages. Start with the story I used as the title of this collection, #Rescue Me. It was inspired by the stories I saw and heard about Fire Festival. I watched the documentaries and kept wondering what hell would be like for those who attended. The second story, Red Eyes, was intended for the 2021 anthology for the New England Horror Writers, which published Does This Bring You Joy? Also in this collection. I didn't finish in time, but it was a fun fit with the rest of the horror stories I was writing. After years of watching shows about hoarding, the hoard had been in my head for years. It was something I quickly wrote and edited. I never found the right anthology for it. Zombie Song is a product of my love of zombie movies, but my realization of how much noise we ignore. The final two stories were part of other collections. I love Does This Bring You Joy? I knew I was going to write it as soon as I read Marie Kondo's books about organizing and binged her show. I was thrilled to be included in Wicked Women with this story. The final story, Northanger After Dark, was an idea that came to me during a trip to Disney World while researching for my rom-com novel, Northanger Parks. These aren't the only stories I wrote during the 18 months of the pandemic. Even as I write this, the pandemic continues and I'm still primarily in the house, trying to cope by writing. I can't wait for you to read these stories and hope you'll want more. Sarah. #rescues me. I want to go home, I whine to anyone listening. Nobody turns to look at me, but I'm confident that they all feel the same way. There are hundreds of us in this microscopic airport in the Caribbean, packed in, mostly unable to see what's going on outside. The only windows are the doors in and the doors out. I've lost most of my possessions, and it feels like we've been here forever. Another person complains about something, I'm not listening. It's like a competition to see who can whine the best. I wanted a story to tell my friends and pictures to share on all my social media. I wanted an adventure to share at parties and when I get old. All my grandparents had been at the original Woodstock. Both my parents had been to Woodstock 1994, they skipped 1999, as well as Lollapalooza and all the other big festivals. Until we were born, they had spent summers in a tiny RV, following their favorite band. I could have gone to a lame, cliché music festival, but those were all fake corporate virtue signaling events. They were everywhere now. I could have spent days in a hot, landlocked field with porta potties and $7 bottled water, getting hosed down until everything was a mud pit. And without showers, so I'd spend the time covered in mud and who knows what else. This was supposed to be the event of my lifetime. I just can't remember the details now. I do remember the plane ride to this island, but I can't remember which island anymore. We were supposed to be on a private jet. They had all these pictures and video on Instagram and TikTok. Influencers and the festival organizers were showing off the fleet of jets they had booked, how they swam with the dolphins and stingrays, and the private cabanas they were building. I remember the cab ride to the airport, but I don't remember which one or where I had come from. We were told to meet at the terminal for chartered flights. I clenched my passport throughout the ride and tried to take photos and videos for my accounts. I had to start over every time the cab hit a pothole or swerved to change lanes. The only sound in the cab was news radio in Spanish. I don't remember what the cab driver looked like. I was already annoyed before he drove through the gates. According to my ticket, I had paid for a ride to the airport. I felt the heat flare across my face as we pulled up to find hundreds of other people were waiting on the tarmac, with mountains of designer luggage. Louis Vuitton's famous monogram print was on so many pieces. I wondered how people would distinguish their own when we got to the festival. My luggage was a cheap, hard black plastic. I had blown all my savings on this festival. I was using my father's luggage. I remember wondering how many people could fit on one plane and how many planes they had. At that moment, a large commercial jet rolled up to us. I don't remember where it came from. I remember my disbelief, pulling up my detailed receipt of what I had paid for. A car to the airport from my house. A private jet. A private cabana for 4 with a bathroom. Celebrity chef cooking our food. A personal pavilion to enjoy the festival from. I had never been given details about my car to the airport, which was why I had arrived in a taxi. Had the private jet changed too? The airline was a discount company that didn't have first or business class. I had emailed customer service, the only option I had to contact the festival organizers, about the issue with my car ride, but still hadn't gotten a response. I went to their Instagram account and found a new link to customer service had been added. I wanted a partial refund if I had to pay for my taxi, and my private jet was a commercial airline. A grayed out box popped up under my message, which gave me hope that someone would respond, but it stayed like that until they started boarding the plane. I looked around at the others boarding the plane. They were all my age and were dressed in different styles. Some looked focused on comfort in yoga pants and leggings. Others were in boho chic looks with knit halter tops and big hats. A few were dressed in designer clothes and looked offended when expected to get on the plane. Everyone's phones were out as they took pictures and made videos. I paused to take some pictures and videos, trying my best to not look irritated and anxious. They had so many people sign up, I heard some girl say as she filmed herself. That they had to charter a bigger plane to get us all there. That was a logical explanation. It would probably have been too expensive to get a fleet of jets given how many people were at the same airport. Maybe I had been close enough to the airport that I hadn't gotten to fly on the private jet. I remember trying to recall which airport we were at, but I was pushed forward and my focus shifted to finding my seat. "Is there Wi-Fi?" someone asked a flight attendant as we all got settled in our seats. "Sorry, we don't provide that," he said. "Not even for a fee?" I saw the flight attendant shake his head and give a fake smile. I turned to the lady next to me to commiserate, but she had already put a mask over her eyes, earbuds in her ears, and her head was resting on a neck pillow. Her purse, stashed under the seat, was a Hermes Birkin bag. I recognized it from other Instagrammers but couldn't tell if it was real. Her sandals looked like designer shoes, and she had large diamond earrings hanging from her lobes. I could see that her makeup was flawlessly applied. She clutched her phone in her perfectly manicured hands. Her nails were bright red and came to a sharp point. My brother called this style talons. I wasn't sure how comfortable she would be at a music festival, even one as extravagant as this one. I was in sneakers and jeans. I planned on applying my makeup in the taxi, but that hadn't been possible. My followers knew what to expect from me. all 10,000 of them. They knew my feed was casual and my platform about being comfortable. I looked at the woman next to me, who applied her lip gloss while she talked to the camera, and questioned what I was doing. I didn't want my followers to see my doubt, so I put my phone on airplane mode as we took off. The storm started as soon as we were at cruising altitude. Thunder boomed and lightning flashed all around the plane. Turbulence prevented any snack or drink service, not that my stomach could have ingested anything. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have because it didn't seem too long before we landed. The island sky was clear and beautiful, the same color as the water we passed over. After we landed, I remember being herded into a smaller propeller plane. I was lucky to be one of the few people on the first puddle jumper. The flight was so loud and bumpy that I couldn't hear the safety instructions from the flight attendant, and I was sure I was going to throw up. I remember taking a deep breath and relaxing when I saw the white sand and sharks swimming in the water below. "Don't worry," the girl next to me said. Minnie Carney said they swam with the sharks, and nobody got hurt. I couldn't remember who Minnie Carney was, but I'd seen that too. I had been excited for the possibility of swimming with them, but I wasn't sure if that was part of the event, or just something to entice us. As we flew over the coast, I noticed large white tents were being set up. I had paid for a cabana, so those had to be the personal pavilions where we would watch the bands. I didn't see where the stage was and was confused. Maybe they were for people who had less expensive packages. In the distance, people milled around a pool deck at a beach house. That must be one of the cabanas, I remember thinking. Everything will be fine. I didn't think to look for more houses as I sank back into my seat, the anxiety leaving my body. My heart sank when we deplaned and were escorted to long yellow school buses. Other people already on the bus looked frazzled and exhausted. Most were still making videos and taking pictures. What hashtags are we using? Someone from my group called out, trying to get everyone excited again. Nobody responded. How many others were expecting better accommodations? How many had paid for luxury we hadn't received yet? I remember asking about my luggage, but the bus driver assured me it would be at the cabana. I was literally pushed down the aisle and into someone's lap. Hands grabbed my ass and breasts as more people were shoved into this space. Tired and felt dirty, I wanted to yell at someone to fix this. The 3 dots on my text message taunted me, and no one had responded to my email. My 1 bar of network signal vanished as soon as the bus left the airport. Others groaned similar losses. How could we share our once-in-a-lifetime experience if we didn't have a network connection? We pulled up to a village of tents, the same ones we had flown over. My heart sank and I braced myself for the disappointment. I could feel the anger in my gut and tried to fight back tears. "If you paid for a private cabana, please get off," a woman with a clipboard said when the bus stopped. Everyone got off the bus. How could this be an exclusive package if everyone had picked it? I wanted to stop and demand what I had paid for, but I was pushed away by the crowd around the bus. "Your bags are on the way," the woman said when the bus pulled away. "For now, please find your tent and get settled." I turned, waiting for more instructions, but she had disappeared. I looked around, others were standing close by looking bewildered. How would we know which tent was ours? All I had was my purse, so I wandered around the campground, hoping for some type of sign or person. My phone still had no signal, and there was nobody to help me. I waited for a few moments to record a video about how angry I was. I would upload it as soon as I could get on a network again. I was secretly hoping someone would come by and give us more instructions, but nobody did. I lost track of time and started to wander around the camp. Each tent had a sheet of paper taped to it with 4 names written on it. The paper was wrinkled as if it had gotten wet and then dried. I was mortified when I found one with my name barely legible. An empty disaster relief tent with no bathroom was not a private cabana. Half the tent was up, the unsupported tarp flapping as a breeze came through. I was standing on a concrete block at the back of the lot in a barely secured tent. I could hear the water crashing outside the tent, but there were no windows to see it. I was in the last row of tent with no way to see the crystal blue waters behind me. I wondered who would be staying with me. My curiosity evaporated as my anger grew. Where was my cabana with a bathroom? Where was my private villa to watch the bands? Where was the stage? Where was my personal chef? After sitting on the concrete for a moment and crying, I walked into the sea of tents and eventually saw a row of. They told us to get our mattresses, someone said as a crowd walked by. Bags are here. Someone yelled from the other direction, back toward my tent. I was torn, not sure where to go first. I was exhausted and didn't want to sleep on the concrete. But I had a spare battery in my suitcase and I was going to make a long video ripping this festival apart. People slammed into me, giving me nasty looks. Afraid I wouldn't get a mattress and positive my luggage would be fine, I made a decision. I remember the near riot around the truck with mattresses, nothing more than limp pieces of soaked egg crate foam. They hit the ground with a slap. People squeezed water out before dragging them away. It's better than nothing, someone said as water dripped on her sandals. I don't remember taking my mattress or getting it back to my tent, but I did because I do remember leaving my purse with it to go get the rest of my luggage. By the time I got there, the huge dump truck pulled away with the back open and suitcases still in the back. There was a pile of suitcases where it had been, unsorted. I remember pulling each one up, hoping it would be mine. I regretted bringing a black suitcase. They were all identical. Others came over and helped me sort through the suitcases, but nobody seemed to walk away with theirs. I felt people grab my ass and breasts as we all bumped into each other. That was beautiful, someone said behind me. I turned around to see the final moments of the sunset over the water. I had seen pictures of a Caribbean sunset with its yellow, orange, and pink hues. I had been looking forward to seeing it for myself, but all I saw was the darkening blue of the night sky. By the time I found my suitcase, it was pitch black outside. I don't remember getting back to the tent, but I was relieved when I did. My 3 roommates had arrived, their mattresses and luggage on the floor, but they had left again. I had no idea who these 3 were, but they were women from the look of the luggage. I could barely see it, but the tent had been finished while I had been gone. Let's party, someone far away from me yelled. I don't remember much after that. I know there was a pallet of vodka bottles, and I took 2. There was no other food or water. Someone said that there had been tuna sandwiches earlier, but they had gone bad in the sun and been removed. So much for the personal chef. I was sure I wouldn't have a private spot to watch the festival from. I didn't have the energy to be angry when someone told us which bands had already backed out. There were whispers that some of the bigger performers hadn't even committed. I hadn't paid attention to the bands. I was here for the experience, ready to enjoy any band that got on the stage. Not that there was a stage. I remember a bonfire, but nothing until morning. It must have been crazy because everything had been fed to the fire except our luggage when the sun came up. The tent frames and weights were all that remained. We sat around drinking through the next day. The vodka was the only thing we had to drink, and food never arrived. Some of us stumbled, drunk, and finally found a half-built stage where we had a drunken dance party. I didn't care about where the music was coming from. I was too busy yelling at nobody, venting my anger that I had been ripped off. I don't remember much after that. I don't remember how long we were there. It felt like hours and an eternity at the same time. It was dark when we were quickly herded onto the bus again and taken back to the tiny airport. I was too drunk to know what was going on. I remember that I sat on a seat this time, but another woman nearly fainted before sitting on my lap. Something in the back of my brain wondered why it had taken so long for this to happen. There were other odd occurrences. I had seen the documentaries and heard the stories about Woodstock 1999. With this level of mismanagement, there should have been injury, death, assaults, and nudity. I should be fleeing for my life in fear, not anger. As the bus bounced toward the airport and my network signal got stronger, I scrolled through my social media feeds. The pictures were black except for the bonfire. The only text in the caption was the hashtag #rescueem. I tapped the link and saw thousands of other posts from people at the festival. As I scrolled, my phone went black and a red battery icon flashed. My backup batteries were in my purse, but I couldn't remember what had happened to my things. The last thing I remember was the bottles of vodka and dancing. I was sure I would get my luggage at the airport. I was beyond angry now, ready to demand a refund or talk to my parents' lawyer about suing. I was glad to be going home, even if I wasn't sure why. The local airport was already packed by the time we got there. They had 5 gates, but only one had a plane waiting. I remember someone saying our bags were already checked and waiting for us on the other end. Everyone looked confused. "I need my charger," someone yelled, panic in her voice. I looked around me as we were led to the gate. Nobody else had a carry-on, and we all looked exhausted. My mascara and eyeliner were smudged, my skin was sunburnt, and my hair was a mess. When had I put on makeup? People looked like they were going to cry or punch someone. At least we were getting right on a plane. In a few hours, I could be home and recuperating. I didn't have an incredible story to tell, but I had something memorable, and I would make sure the press knew about this too. I remember being directed to a seat. Nobody had boarding passes or assigned seats. The flight attendant had a sheet of paper and checked our names off as she walked by. "Ladies and gentlemen," another flight attendant said through the speakers. "It seems we have one more person than we should. We don't know how, but hold tight, and we'll figure it out." I tried to find a way to charge my phone while we waited, but so was everyone else. There were no outlets or chargers on the plane. My heart started racing and my stomach cramped as my anxiety rose. I wanted to add my pictures and videos to that hashtag. I had proof about how bad the event had been if I could just get my phone charged for a little while. People around me whined about the same thing, and one woman stomped her way to the front of the plane. She started a heated discussion with the flight attendants. Arms were waved, fingers were pointed, and the woman returned to her seat with a face so red that I wondered if it was her anger on top of a sunburn. "Ladies and gentlemen," the flight attendant said into the phone again. "We have been informed that our crew has been working for too long, and we need to deboard the plane until our new crew arrives." Row by row was directed to the exit and back into the crowded airport. Every seat was taken. I made my way around the airport, hoping to find someone with a comparable charger for my phone. "I'm so hungry. Where can we get food?" someone moaned as I walked by. "The restaurant is closed until tomorrow," someone else said. There were only groans in response. I tried to remember the last time I had eaten or drunk anything but vodka, and my stomach grumbled. I remember looking for a bathroom to find water. My head started to pound, and I got lightheaded. I didn't have the energy to wait in the long bathroom line and found a place to sit to see if the line got shorter. They locked the doors. "We're locked in," said a man pacing next to my spot. Some people around me started to cry, but most were passed out. I couldn't see the front of the airport from my spot, but it seemed like more people were coming in from their flights. Was anyone leaving? Was anyone angry and trying to get help? I had no strength to do it myself. If I could sleep or drink some water, I would feel better. I noticed a charger plugged into the wall socket right next to me. It was the exact one I needed for my phone. I quickly attached my phone to the charger before anyone else saw it. I didn't care who had left the charger. I needed to call my family and let them know what was going on. I needed to post my photos and videos to Instagram and TikTok. People needed to know what had happened before the organizers could spin this. What do we do? I asked, feeling less anxious now that my phone was charging. The woman next to me shrugged. Do your best to sleep. Nobody's going anywhere until morning. I let out a sigh and shut my eyes. Somehow I managed to fall asleep. I woke up with a start and got to my feet. I had no idea how long I had been asleep, but it felt like it had been too long. I checked my phone, but it was on the floor next to me. The charger was still in the wall, but another phone with a different plug was attached to it. I checked my phone, and it had a little battery power. I got it turned on and watched my screen come up. I could see my apps, but I couldn't find a network connection, and there was no Wi-Fi available. I wanted to yell in frustration, but everyone around me was asleep. I turned off the phone again, not wanting to waste the little battery power I had. Before I did, I snapped a few pictures of the crowd around me. The bathroom line was gone. I gulped dirty water from the sink. I felt a little better, but the water made my head throb and my stomach growl again. I walked out to see a woman behind the desk at the gate. I carefully made my way around the sleeping bodies to talk to her. When will they board us? I whispered. You're on the next plane, she said with a fake smile and pointed to the glass door that led to the tarmac and the plane. I didn't consider my luck as I stood where she pointed. Nobody else was there, but slowly people got in line behind me. All of us groggy and hungry. People held on to each other, dizzy with dehydration. I heard a stomach rumble and felt mine do the same. My mouth was so dry I couldn't create any saliva to swallow. Again, nobody asked for a boarding pass as they let us board the plane. It was a large jet like it had been the night before. We had arrived in a small puddle jumper. A bigger plane seemed too large for this airport. I'd assumed, last night, that they were trying to get as many of us off the island as quickly as possible. None of us had left, so I must be wrong about that. Go all the way to the back, a flight attendant said, but I stopped and took a seat in the middle of the plane. I looked for a charger, failing like I had the night before. There were none on this plane either. Once all the seats were full, the flight attendant walked up the aisle and checking off our names. It took forever for her to make her way up, but she walked back as quickly as she could. I had no idea how long we sat there. I had no watch, and when I tried to check my phone, the battery was dead. It felt like an eternity. Ladies and gentlemen, another flight attendant said through the speakers. It seems we have one more person than we should. We don't know how, but hold tight, and we'll figure it out. This was the same problem they'd had on the other flight. How? Where could an extra person go? There were only so many seats before people were forced to stand. I wasn't the only person irritated. A woman stomped down the aisle, the same one as the night before. Today her hands were clenched in fists. Arms waved. I closed my eyes and must have fallen asleep again. The sun was setting when I opened them again. I expected to see nothing but clouds, but we were still on the ground. I had slept through the day. My brain struggled to process what this meant, but I knew it wasn't good. I looked at the man next to me. He was asleep too. It looked like everyone had fallen asleep. Ladies and gentlemen, the flight attendant said into the phone again, waking everyone up with a start. We have been informed that our crew has been working for too long, and we need to deboard the plane until our new crew arrives. I looked at the man sitting next to me, but he was still groggy, and nothing odd registered on his face. He got up and waited for our row's turn to exit the plane. I got up and followed everyone back into the airport. I stayed where I was, confused at how docile everyone was. Was only one of us angry about being stuck here? I needed to think. I did my best to focus as I deplaned, but I needed water. The airport seemed more crowded than it had the previous night. People were crying. I found a spot on the ground after going to the bathroom to try and get some water. It had been packed with women cleaning themselves, doing their hair, and fixing their makeup. It smelled like shit, urine, and unclean bodies. I dreaded the thought of trying to use a toilet, but I was too dehydrated to need one. I managed to get to the sink and drank a little murky water before leaving again. I didn't want to think about why the water was so disgusting and what it would do to me. I pushed away the thoughts of parasites. No food or clean water again today, the woman next to me whispered, and my stomach growled in response. They opened and closed already. She was laying on the tiled floor, listless and weak. The water in the bathroom is gross, but you should drink something, I told her. She nodded her head but didn't move. How many hours were we on the plane? I asked. No idea, she said, her head lolling from side to side and words raspy. The clock never changes. I looked up at the ancient clock behind a cage above the bathrooms. Even if it had moved, the bars of the cage made it difficult to tell. I was pretty sure it indicated 6 o'clock, but if it never moved, then that meant nothing. I couldn't find a charger for my phone that night, so I closed my eyes. Locked in again, the woman whispered as I drifted off to sleep. My eyes snapped open again the next morning, and I practically ran to the bathroom to clean up. I didn't know where this burst of energy came from, but I wasted no time getting to the gate, and again I was at the front of the line. This time when I took a seat at the window, I opened the shade. Again the flight attendant walked up the aisle and checked off our names. It took so long that I dozed off. Ladies and gentlemen, another flight attendant said, her voice causing me to open my eyes again. It seems we have one more person than we should. We don't know how, but hold tight, and we'll figure it out. I watched the woman stomp down the aisle for the third time, her hands balled into fists, her face already red, and her nostrils flaring. The only thing that I could think was that I'm in hell. We're all in hell. Red eyes. Have you been in the forest yet? The older woman sitting next to me asked. Maite and I sat on a log at a large fire pit at the campground. This was our first visit to this busy family campground in Seabury, MA. Seabury was a blink and you'll miss it town by the Quabbin Reservoir in central Massachusetts. This was the last weekend of the season, everyone else had spent most of the summer together. Multiple people had come by and invited us to join the community campfire, as soon as we had stepped out of our camper earlier that day. Everyone had brought their dinners, and now that it was dark, we were making s'mores and telling stories. I shook my head and blew out the fiery inferno that was my marshmallow. The black char smelled like caramelized sugar. This was the first time since we had gotten into the camper before dawn that Maite wasn't complaining about my surprise long weekend trip. Her list of grievances including waking up before the sun rose, the length of time we had to wait food at Dunkin's, the shitty roads that were full of potholes, and the number of people who had needed to come into our camper and explore. Now she was sipping from a mug filled with spiked hot chocolate, still pouting, but at least she seemed to be enjoying herself. What's wrong with the forest? I asked as I laid the blackened marshmallow on the piece of chocolate and graham cracker. The woman leaned close like she was telling me a secret. I'm only warning you because nobody else will think to do it. We all know it's off limits, but your spot is closer than anyone else's camps, the woman said. I hadn't caught this woman's name, but I didn't know anyone else's either. Maite and I only came over because she needed to get out from the small camper we were using for the weekend. I worried this weekend might be the doom of our relationship. Why is it off limits? I asked before taking a bite of my s'more. The woman slowly turned her marshmallow, patiently letting it brown on all sides. It's haunted, and people get hurt when they go in. We don't need a lawsuit, so we just keep it off limits, she said in a loud whisper. Don't listen to her, a man said as he came out of the darkness. It's a small wooded area with a nice little creek where you can go fishing. The log shifted as Maite turned to hear more. She loved fishing, having the patience to sit for hours with a book and wait for something good to bite. I had assumed her love of fishing would mean she liked camping. I had been wrong, and even getting a camper to make the weekend more comfortable had been a miscalculation. We brought our fishing gear, I said after I swallowed. That's what we want to do tomorrow. The man nodded, and, since there was a new moon tonight, I could just see from the firelight the woman rolling her eyes. You'll be fine if you stay on the path, he said. The stories are just local myths. I've never had a problem. The stories are more than local myths, John, she said and slapped her leg. The stories go back to the colonial era and probably longer than that. This has remained undeveloped for a reason. I looked back and forth between John and the woman. How's it haunted? Tell her, Marcia. It's your theory, John said and walked away with a huff. The whole region is a little spooky, but I hear things at night, Marcia said, leaning in again. I hear creaking and moaning from the forest all the time. There are trees, when you get deeper, that have these blood-red knots in the middle of their trunks. My eyes got wide. So, you've been in then? Maite asked, slurring her words a little. My girlfriend had turned toward us. For someone who hated camping, she enjoyed the key elements of a camping trip. Her love of horror books and movies made her the perfect mark for a mysterious local folktale. Just once, Marcia added. When we first started camping here. They scared the bejesus out of me, and I won't go back in. I had been told there was a hot spring near the creek that was nice too, you know. Marcia winked, and Maite coughed. Something about this old woman talking about skinny dipping and sex made me want to giggle. I've heard the stories too, someone else said from the other side of the fire pit, but I couldn't see who. There are records from the colonists who first settled here, and the trees spooked them. Even the natives avoided the spot. Have you been in? Marcia asked. There is a long pause on the other end. No, the voice finally said. I wouldn't dare go back there. I've lived in the Bridgewater area long enough to know weird stuff happens here all the time. It's because the Native Americans cursed the settlers. John came back towards us from the opposite direction. The whole area is cursed, but if you're lucky, you'll see some amazing things like thunderbirds. And mutilated animals, another man said with a deep chuckle. The devil worshippers in the 1980s used to come into the forest and sacrifice people. Who knows how many disappeared? An entire town disappeared once, John said. It's under the reservoir. There are a bunch of towns like that, Marcia said. That was planned even if they didn't tear down all the buildings. There's Dunwich, John said. Even I had heard about that town. In the past 5 years, it had become a ghost town, people disappearing or moving away in fear. That's not in the Bridgewater Triangle, Marcia waved her hand dismissing John's comment. That's too far north. Both Maite and I were transfixed by this conversation. I wondered how often this group had this argument, it felt rehearsed. Maybe I could convince Maite to join me in the forest tomorrow. Hopefully, the fishing spot and hot spring were on the trail. I found a book in the library that said the trees have always been there, a teenage boy on the log next to Maite said. They're a line of birch trees or something. Nobody cuts them down. I met Maite's eyes, convincing her wouldn't require any effort. I woke up alone the following day. I could smell bacon cooking on the tiny stove on the other side of the flimsy partition. I had crashed when we got back to the camper and slept through the night, something I rarely did, even at home. Maite was up first and was whistling instead of picking another fight with me. She had done that repeatedly since I announced this trip a few weeks before. I hoped this peace would last for the rest of the trip, and we could have a fun day. Want to find the fishing spot? I asked her as we ate. She didn't meet my eye as she scribbled in her daily journal. We should try to find those weird trees, she said with a nod. I wasn't excited about the idea of finding some creepy trees, but I was willing to do anything to make her happy. Maite wrote everything in her journal, including questions she wanted to answer. She considered it a reflection of her mind, and if she was interested in a unique experience that she could research later, then I would accommodate that. This entire adventure had started with the worst fight of our relationship. I'd wanted to go camping for our fall vacation, but she'd wanted something more comfortable. I'd thought buying a camper would be a compromise and found a classic Silver Bullet online. It was used and had needed some fixing, but it'd be perfect for our first camping trip as a couple. I'd been pleased with myself until I'd seen the look on Maite's face. She'd said when she saw me pull into her driveway, my truck pulling the trailer behind it. What the hell is this? She was cute when she was confused. Her nose would scrunch up, her head tilted to the side as she blinked rapidly. Unable to keep from smiling, I'd kissed her on the nose once I was out of the truck and standing beside her. I solved the problem, I'd said, turning to face the sleek camper. What problem would that be, Carmen? Maite had asked. I hated to think about the fight a week before. I had suggested a romantic camping trip in the woods to celebrate our first anniversary, fantasizing about it for weeks. A brochure for the campground had come in the mail earlier in the summer, and I had been thinking about it for weeks. There had been a special price for the weekend. I had all the equipment. I had loved camping all my life, often going before I met Maite. I knew she liked fishing, and I'd found a campground close to a river. She'd seemed as disgusted by the trailer as she had been when I'd suggested we sleep in a tent on an air mattress. I'm a hotel and spa girl, she'd said as she walked around the camper, repeating what she had told me when I had proposed the camping trip. I want someone to clean up my room and room service to bring me meals. I want to get a massage and swim in a warm pool. I don't camp. Last week, I'd picked that moment to argue, and the entire conversation had descended into a fight about forcing my preferences on her. This time, I had questioned and regretted my plan. I had already booked everything and couldn't get a refund since this had been a special price. Look, I know you said you don't want to sleep on the ground. I get it. This way, we're sleeping in a bed. I already bought the pass to camp on the site, and it's got this amazing brook where you can fish, swim, and relax. I'd said, taking in her hands and squeezing them. Maite had pulled one hand away from me so she could rub it over her face. She'd sighed, and I could practically see her brain working on how to respond. You owe me a luxury spa trip for this. In the next 3 months. Going into the woods was clearly off limits. Not only did the campground's welcome brochure explain that, but there was a chain-link fence blocking the way. The fence was also cut open. Clearly, people went in all the time, and I wasn't going to let a silly rule keep me from salvaging this trip. I watched Maite pack for the day. Autumn had arrived, even though the weather forecast had promised warmth all weekend. It was overcast and damp, which made it feel colder than it was. Maite knew what she needed for fishing. I wasn't interested in it myself, but I had a book and blanket, so I could relax with her. I made sure we had food and plenty of water. I even packed a towel in case we found a hot spring to swim in. We stuck to the path as we walked, and it wasn't long before we found a spot Maite liked. She set up her fishing equipment while I laid out the blanket and snacks. She was silent as she cast her line and waited for a bite as she put the bait on my hook and handed it to me. The tension between us faded some as we listened to the rustling of the leaves and the creaking as the trees moved when the wind blew. I could hear the crashing of water as it broke over a small waterfall some distance away. We got comfortable and read our books, waiting for something to bite. We said nothing as we enjoyed the sounds of the world around us. Our spot was in a clearing, so when the sun suddenly appeared, the blonde highlights in Maite's brown hair shined. Watching her relax helped ease the anxiety I hadn't realized I was carrying too. Let's go find the hot spring, I said after a few hours, closing my book. Nothing had bitten, so Maite pulled her line in with a frown before peering into the water. She could have waited longer, but that didn't seem to be why she was unhappy. There aren't any fish in this stream. That's weird, she said without looking up from the water. Maybe because it's so late in the season? I suggested, not sure if that was a real reason. I had no idea how fishing worked. The spring was a completely disconnected body of water, a little larger than the above-ground pool at my parents' house. Maite was the one who found it and dipped her hand in before I got to the spot. It was in a dense cluster of trees. Maite smiled at me and started removing her clothes as I looked at the trees. Their leaves were already turning red, but they didn't have the bloody knots that Marcia and John had talked about the night before. I dropped our things and followed her example, ready to finally enjoy this camping trip with the woman I loved. Come in, Carmen, Maite said after jumping in, her long dark hair pooling around her. It's like a hot tub in winter. I got close to the edge. There were rocks around it, almost deliberately there to lure people in. I tossed my underwear and bra away as I peered over the edge. It looked deeper than I expected, the water dark as if there was no bottom. Unlike Maite, I sat down on a rock and slid in. There was no place to stand, let alone sit. We swam around in different directions before finding a solid spot for our feet. Maite giggled as she pulled me closer, and I felt her hands brush over my body. I leaned in and kissed her as she pinned me between her warm body and the muddy wall of the spring. Our hands roamed each other's bodies, and I wished for a less precarious position. Maite pulled away from me, her eyes wide. Did that tree just blink? I turned, grabbing hold of the rock edge so I could see better. Her body pressed against me, shaking. The tree facing us was like the others, but also had a knot facing us. I understood why the others had described them as bloody. The bright red sap dripped from the corner of the large, round knot in the center. Their roots were even covered by the old, maroon sap that had been dripping for years. I'm sure it was your imagination, I said, trying to hide my fear. I had checked these trees. I would have noticed if one had that knot. Then we heard a rustle in the forest and that was all it took. I grabbed Maite's hand underwater and looked our clothes. We were on the opposite end of the spring, but I could see the pile of our things. I want to go home, Maite whispered. I could hear her teeth clattering and realized the temperature in the water had changed. It took me a moment, but I realized the creaking of the trees had abruptly stopped. Get out. I pulled myself out of the water and then helped her out. It took all my strength to lift her. The last thing I wanted to do was swim back to our clothes. I want to go home, Maite said again, her voice now a sharp whine. I was surprised I could hear her over all the different sounds that started coming from the forest. The creating had started again, and now I heard snapping and rustling as if the trees were attacking each other. I walked through the maze of trees that hadn't seemed to be there before, but I wasn't getting closer to our stuff. I could still see the pile, but we seemed to be getting farther away. Are the trees moving? I stopped and looked for a better path around the spring. Maite didn't respond. Something thudded behind me. I turned, expecting to see Maite when I heard a sharp scream. She was several feet behind me, on her hands and knees at the base of 2 trees. Ruddy dirt splattered all over her naked body. Carmen, I need help, she cried. Her foot was caught under a root. As I headed to help her, the blood-red knot on a tree opened. Like an eye. I stumbled and fell back. I tried to crawl away, but Maite grabbed my ankle. Carmen, I can't get my foot free. Tears streamed down her face. I swear, the knot looked down at her, blinked, and then turned back at me. I got back up and tried to pull her foot free. I can't get it free, baby. I had to shout over the moaning, rasping wood. Maite just cried. The root tightens around her foot. I didn't know what to do. There was probably a small knife with our stuff, but we were nude in the dark forest. I wanted to cry too. If the knot was like an eye, then I might be able to hurt it and get it to free Maite. I climbed past her, over the roots, and pulled my fist back. The crack of bone seared up my arm upon impact. It wasn't soft tissue like a human eye, no matter what it appeared to be. Pain screaming from my hand made me swoon. Then a crunch from my foot nearly doubled me over, tree roots crushed up to my ankle. The world spun around me and I lost focus for a moment. I darted my head around, when I could see again, looking for Maite. Roots held both her hands, and she was deep enough for them to stretch over her back as she sunk deeper into the ground. I could no longer see her hands and feet as the roots pushed her down. Carmen. She mouthed through her tears, repeating my name over and over. I couldn't hear her over the noise of the trees. I tried to get to her, but I was being pulled farther away from her, the roots dragging my feet. My face slammed into a thick root and my vision blurred. Whichever tree held me, it wasn't the same one that had captured her. This one was pulling me away, making it impossible for me to help. I tried to grab onto another root as I was pulled farther away. My hand slipped and my fingernails bent back. I cried out as the bones in my feet snapped like twigs, the pain so intense I could barely see. I could make out Maite as she was pushed into the earth, not even able to see me, but that was for the best, because I too was descending, the roots grabbing my waist and pulling me deeper. My vision cleared for a moment and I saw all the trees around me, red knots blinking in random order. Nothing helped as I was encased in the roots. They squeezed me and I thought I was going to pop like a balloon. I could still hear Maite crying even though she was gone. It was like an echo in my head. The last thing I saw was the blood-red knot look down at me and blink. I was sure the tree was smiling. The hoard. Slap. My face stung where I'd slapped myself. This was my automatic response when I felt a roach scramble across me. I opened my eyes and looked at my empty hand. This roach lived to see another day. It was difficult, but I could see bands of light. I was pretty sure I was in my den. All the rooms looked the same, but I was sleeping in the recliner. Once upon a time, this leather recliner had been my husband's favorite. I would sit on one of our couches to watch television after dinner, but he would always sit here. Its soft black leather would creak when he pushed the button to lift the leg rest. The kids would joke that it sounded like the chair was farting. Now it was worn down to the lining in some spots, the polyester filling was pushing through in others. The mice and rats had eaten that filling or taken it for their nests, leaving pockmarks. I stood up and stretched, thinking about my breakfast. Years ago, I had moved my microwave into this room. It sat on top of our massive, 70-inch projector TV. Our kids had been popular because of this TV. We'd always hosted movie nights and sleepovers for their friends. It might still work, but I didn't have any electricity in the house to know. I listened to my little wind-up radio now, and sometimes I bought batteries to power a portable CD player. A generator powered the microwave, but I could barely afford the gasoline to run it. My daughter, the only one of my children still speaking to me, was kind enough to send me money every month to help. I ate my store-brand breakfast sandwich in the microwave and thought about my day. I had been dreaming of shopping, my favorite thing to do. I wanted to go to the thrift store down the street. I had a battered shopping cart in the yard that I could take. Then I could also stop at the gas station on the same block and get some food for the next few days. I didn't keep much food in the house, only having a cooler we used to take to the beach in the summer. I needed to clean myself before leaving. As soon as I finished my sandwich, leaving the trash in a pile next to my recliner, I went back to the kitchen. That was where I kept the wash bucket. I had asked my daughter to send wet wipes, but she refused. I used the bucket, a towel, and some inexpensive dish soap to wash when I needed to go out. My neighbor had been kind enough to let me run a hose from her house since my water was turned off years ago. The tiny roaches scattered as I picked up the bucket and took it outside to fill. This wasn't always my life. My husband and I had purchased this house in the mid-70s, just before our oldest son, Jason, was born. I haven't seen Jason in nearly 30 years, ever since he left for college. A few years after Jason, our daughter Bonnie was born, and our son Kevin followed her. We had a wonderful home until my husband lost his job. My hoarding began as I tried to save money, buy in bulk, and stash things for a rainy day. It could have ended when he got a new job, but the next tragedy happened. My parents died in quick succession, leaving me an orphan. I inherited all their things and brought them into our home, insisting on going through all their stuff myself. These things had been precious to my parents, and they were memories of a happy life. Stacks of paper towels, toilet paper, and cleaning supplies were never used as quickly as I acquired more. I refused to pass up sales, hiding my purchases in closets and cabinets. When those were full, I used our guest room. It didn't take long for that room to be so full we couldn't get in. Once something was hidden, even I forgot about it. Then I started sneaking things into the kids' rooms, under their beds, in their closets, until I simply stopped pretending and took over their spaces. My own room followed. Once my husband left me because of the hoarding, I gave up, and the trash piled up. Jason tried to clean up once, but we had a huge fight. He left and never came back. When the kids threw away my things, I would go out at night, roaming the streets and gathering the items they'd thrown in our neighbors' trash cans. The hoard and trash have taken over the house. The roaches, rats, and other wild animals hide inside the walls, coming out when it's dark. I hear things crashing in other rooms as they fall. I can't even get up the stairs to the bedrooms or bathrooms up on the second floor. Once I'd tried to go down to our basement, once a playroom for the kids, and had slipped on the trash piled on the stairs. Now I stay on the first floor, moving through the narrow and precarious paths of bags, boxes, and scattered trash to get from room to room. I bathe outside, keeping a shower curtain up around my spot on the concrete pad of our porch. I use the toilet at local gas stations. I take my clothes to the laundromat down the street to wash them. People know to keep their distance. Mom, Bonnie said when I answered the cheap flip phone she pays for. I've contacted a new TV show they're doing about hoarding. They've agreed to have you on their show. This wasn't Bonnie's first attempt to get me on a TV show like this. Will your brothers be included? I asked. She was silent for a moment. Mom, you know they haven't spoken to me since they left home. Neither has Dad. I don't even know how to contact them. They're not on social media. They're done with both of us. Will the show find them to include them? I asked. Bonnie sighed, and I could imagine her rubbing her eyes, already exhausted with me. Maybe. I don't know. They're going to come to the house next week. They want to film it, and you have to show me how bad it is. Bonnie already knew how bad the house is. She had seen the letters from the town telling me that they would condemn the house if I didn't clean it up. I had a mortgage that I had stopped paying, and the bank was threatening to foreclose, selling it to someone who would just dump everything. She was desperate to keep me from moving into her house and bringing my trash with me. Fine, I said, not wanting a fight. What do you smell? The therapist asked me. A therapist and organizer were with the crew when they arrived a week later. The looks on their faces made it clear that they hadn't expected this much of a disaster. There was no place to sit inside, so we sat on the front step talking about how things had gotten this bad and what I wanted to keep. Bonnie came a few hours later for her tour of the house. The look on my daughter's face was a mix of disgust, shock, and embarrassment. I had no excuses she hadn't heard before. I shrugged and shook my head. Nothing. You don't smell the urine and rot, the organizer asked. I shook my head again. I was used to it. It smells like death, Bonnie said, scrunching her nose. Leaving me on the steps with the camera crew, who filmed the entire exchange, the organizer and the production crew stood in a tight circle and discussed their options. They were worried that I seemed resigned to both the hoard and the cleanup. They wondered if I would sit back and do nothing or if I would pick a fight about every item they wanted to remove. They insisted on calling an exterminator. They would film all of it, even though an exterminator wouldn't be able to help until the hoard was significantly reduced. Everything in the house is covered in rat urine and feces, the exterminator said after trying to walk through the house. He set traps under the house since that was all he could access. When you're done cleaning it out, I can deal with the roaches too, he said to the cameras before leaving. I reminded myself that this might be something my sons see, and it might prompt them to come home. If I was lucky, my husband would do the same. We're going to put you up in a hotel tonight, the producer said. I shook my head, insisting on staying in my home. It's not safe, Bonnie said with more force than I had ever heard from her. I continued to shake my head. You can sleep in a nice bed and get a real shower, the therapist said. I turned and walked back into the house. I had no plan on leaving that easily. I heard them whispering behind me. A crew was hired to help remove everything from the house. They were there before I woke up the next morning. Bonnie rushed me to get dressed and outside. I saw them setting up a portable toilet so people could use it throughout the day. Here's how this will work, the organizer said after the scene was staged. If it's clearly trash, then throw it in the dumpster. If it's in shopping bags or boxes, put it on the tarps where we will go through things. The team agreed, giving each other high fives and slapping backs. I sat by the tarp, ready to go through the bags of my things that came out. As we sorted through the bags, the therapist and I talked about my husband and sons. Bonnie sat with us for a while to talk about how she felt about the hoard and their departures. I feel like it all falls on my shoulders, she said, tears filling her eyes. I resent them for leaving me all alone. The therapist nodded. Does that upset you? She asked me, putting a hand on Bonnie's shoulder. I shook my head. Why not? Bonnie asked, her sorrow switching to anger in a heartbeat. I shrugged. Her face turned red, and Bonnie sneered. This is my last effort before I do the same thing they did, she said. The therapist watched me while Bonnie spoke. I knew this already. I was surprised it had taken this long for her to give up. We have a problem, one of the producers said toward the end of the first day. Let's go into the house. I was surprised to see how much they had cleared. Most of the first floor had been trash that I had never removed. The kitchen was empty but filthy. I could see they had made it to the top of the stairs. The crew stood around and talked as I walked through, amazed at the dirt and grime all over the house. The carpets, once beige, were black with dirt. The formica floors in the kitchen were yellow in some spots and black in others. The cabinets were caked with yellow grease, and the once white walls had spots of black mold on them. I've already called the cops, I heard the producer say. I realized Bonnie was sobbing and wailing. She can't stay here, the therapist said, and I watched the crew members take my daughter outside. I saw the spinning red lights and heard the sirens wail as fire trucks, ambulance, and cops pulled up to the house. The therapist pulled me into the kitchen, the sunlight fading and the bright lights for the cameras filling the empty first floor. She forced me to sit on a folding chair they brought in from outside. I'm going to share some news that you'll probably find upsetting. I want you to remember that we are here to support you, the therapist said before taking a deep breath. We found a body at the top of the staircase. I rapidly blinked, thinking about the animals roaming around the house. Like a cat's body? I asked, assuming cats had made homes in the hoard along with other feral animals. No, a human's body. It's mummified, but it looks like a man's body. I shook my head rapidly. No, nobody's died here. He appears to be wearing a green sweater. I kept shaking my head because none of this was possible. The night he left, Chris had been wearing a hideous green Christmas sweater that I hated. The kids had all stayed at hotels that Christmas because there was no way to get into the bedrooms on the second floor. Chris and I had been sleeping on the sofa bed ourselves. How could you not smell a rotting body? She said, spit flying out of her mouth. I stood there blinking. I had already stopped smelling the trash at that point. A cop walked into the room with a medic. We need to do an autopsy, but our guess right now is that the hoard fell on him and he suffocated. There's no sign of violence, but it's not something we can tell until the medical examiner takes a closer look. Do we need to shut down the production? The producer asked him. I would for the night, the cop said as he absently nodded his head. We'll have a better idea in the morning. You're staying at the hotel tonight, Bonnie said to me. I shook my head. No. She looked around the room, raising her arms. Where are you going to sleep? They took Dad's disgusting recliner away. I'll figure it out. Maybe I can get into one of the bedrooms now that the stairs are cleared. Dad died in this house. Doesn't that bother you? She asked, tears filling her eyes. Don't you want to talk about how this changes your feelings about his leaving? Your hoard killed my father. I took a deep breath and nodded, more focused on the open space around the house than I was on my daughter's distress. Your brothers will have to come for the funeral, I whispered. You can stop lying about knowing their locations. Bonnie shook with anger and closed her eyes. You died long before he did, she said, walking toward the den. I wish you had died instead of him. The equipment remained after they left the house. I could hear their generator running, so I turned on the lights. They filled the room with a bright, stark light. There was a stain at the top of the stairs that marked where Chris's body had spent the last 20 years. Something inside me popped like a small bubble. As my anger overwhelmed me, I started throwing boxes and bags down the stairs. Bonnie was right. The hoard had done this, and I had created the hoard. After an hour of chaotic movement, I created a small path toward the door that used to be my bedroom. After dragging some lights up the stairs, thanks to extension cords they had left, I was able to see into my bedroom. I hadn't been in here since before Chris had left, but I opened the door with ease. There were signs that Chris had intended to leave. The drawers of our dresser had been left open. Hangers had been thrown on the bed. Boxes and bags had been piled higher than I remembered, probably to make the paths Chris needed to get around the room. I wondered if his suitcase was somewhere in the hoard. MOM? I heard someone call from downstairs, repeating and moving closer. Bonnie? I finally called back and turned to see her in the doorway, taking deep breaths. They're all here, aren't they? She narrowed her eyes. What? I asked, shuddering. I didn't want to even think about what she was suggesting. I was almost at my hotel when it hit me. Jason and Kevin are here too. I'm willing to bet something fell on them and they died. Just like Dad did. I shook my head, unwilling to believe 3 people had died the same way. The hoard hadn't been that bad, had it? Bonnie went back to the top of the stairs and started throwing the boxes and bags down the staircase. Had I looked this frantic when I had done the same? I started helping. Anxiety to see if her theory was correct fueled our efforts. I don't know how long we worked, but we cleared the hallway. Some of the hoard now blocked access to the stairs and master bedroom again. Down on the first floor, bags and boxes had broken on impact, and things scattered around the main room. Bonnie stood in front of Jason's bedroom door, and I stood by Kevin's. My daughter struggled to push the door open. I heard things crack as she put all her strength into it. Oh fuck, that's the smell of death, she cried, looking disgusted. Nothing smelt different to me. I opened Kevin's bedroom door with unexpected ease. The clear path went from the window to the bedroom door where there had once been a great climbing tree outside Kevin's window. It had been cut down years ago, but I was sure he had used it to sneak in and out of the house as a teenager. Fuck, it's worse. Bonnie said, coming back behind me, coughing and covering her nose with her hand. I still couldn't smell anything different. Bonnie wasn't waiting for me. She had her phone out, and I knew she was calling the cops to come back. They would find my son's bodies in their bedrooms. I couldn't make out anything, but I suspected they would be buried under the hoard. I would be arrested and sent to jail. Everything would be trashed and the house torn down. Panic gripped my lungs, and I started hyperventilating. Mom. Bonnie turned back to me, ready to help. She didn't have a chance to do anything. My vision turned over and I struggled to catch my breath. I tried to grab onto a large plastic crate, but the avalanche of stuff began to fall. I could see the small plastic bags from the grocery store and boxes from Briber, that multi-level marketing company I had invested in their opportunity but never opened the boxes. The vibrations of our footsteps must have loosened the precarious stacks. Boxes and bags fell on her, pushing her to her knees and burying her. They were so old that I couldn't make out logos or see shipping labels. In seconds, all I could see was her arm and hand extended to me for help. It took my body a moment to move, but I stumbled back into the hallway. The path we had made to the bedrooms seemed smaller. My mind rationalized this was my panic's perception. It only felt like space was closing in. Plastic bags fell on me first, covering my face and blocking my airflow. A bag pushing deeper into my throat with each breath I tried to take. It was slick and slid down easily. I couldn't get my hands close enough to my mouth to remove it. I could hear Bonnie choking on something as she suffocated as well. This must have been how my family died too. Something heavy and hard hit me, knocking the wind out of me, and I collapsed. There was a loud ringing in my head as more boxes fell, and I was soon unable to move from under the weight. Another bag completely covered over my head. All I saw was gray plastic and my lungs burned as I blindly suffocated. I couldn't get my hands out from the boxes that pinned them down. I knew something heavy fell when I felt the small bones in my feet shatter, the pain shooting through my body. It would have knocked the wind out of me if I had a clear airway. All went dark when something heavy fell out of a box and onto my head. Zombie song. When I worked at a sub shop, my manager often let me pick the music during our shift. She said it was because I had great taste. I thought it was because she was flirting with me. We dated after I quit, but she enjoyed the same music as I did, so we were both right. Occasionally we would fuck around and put on the most obnoxious station we could find. We would take bets on how long it would take someone to notice and complain. We had a whiteboard in the prep area with a betting pool. The lesson from the game, other than the $20 you won if you were right, was that most people ignore the music, especially if the volume was low. Even though it was a corporate-approved set of stations, we had some exciting options like show tunes, Disney musicals, and Christmas songs. You would think people would notice if Christmas music played in February or October, but it would usually take hours for someone to notice. The same was true no matter where I was. I once sat for hours working in a cafe, listening to songs from animated movies. I had no idea until the person next to me had a meltdown about it. All it took was one person to mention it, and the songs would get stuck in my head. It got to the point where I would wear earbuds to listen to my music as I shopped or sat in cafes. This would save my life. I was in the grocery store when it started. I was picking up barbecue supplies on my way to a pool party with friends. My plan was to rush into the store, grab a dessert, some veggies with dip, something to grill, and a box of sodas. In and out. But I got delayed in the bakery section, torn between cupcakes and cookies that smelt freshly baked while listening to a true crime podcast. I finally picked Boston cream cupcakes, something I had no idea how to make myself. A crowd gathered around the registers. Everyone looked horrified and stepped back as 5 people lumbered into the crowd. I pulled out one earbud expecting to hear evacuation instructions. "We need 5 more volunteers," a monotonous voice said over the speakers. People took another step back, and I was pushed on 3 sides. I just wanted to make my purchase and leave, but someone grabbed my elbow and pulled me back. I turned to see an older woman with a gray pixie cut. "There's zombies," she said in a low whisper. I saw it at another store. "Don't go up there." Behind her were 3 men about my age. They beckoned me to follow. I did upon seeing one of the volunteers, a middle-aged woman, waddling the crowd, humming something. Her pupils obscured her irises. Another volunteer, an older man, put headphones over someone's ears and that person began to hum. "Don't listen." One of the guys leading us away from the crowd pointed to my earbuds. "This is round 3, and they all do that. Put your earbuds back in. Just stay still, don't make any movement." The woman flattened herself against the racks of potato chips. I put in my earbud, noticing the guys with me do the same. Employees from the back of the store, all with dilated pupils, waddled to the front. Other people walked down the aisle, curious about what was going on at the front of the store. None seemed to pay attention to us, other than quick, questioning glances. The zombified employees grabbed them and drafted them toward the registers. I wasn't sure why they ignored us, but I held my breath as they passed, hoping none of us would rattle a bag of chips. It seemed like we stood there for an eternity, the podcast in my earbuds telling me about a discovered, bloated body. Eventually, one of the men waved at us to follow him and led us to the store's back. I still had my basket of food as I picked up the pace. My heart pounding in my chest muted the details of the unsolved crime to nothing more than a hum. When I pushed through the loading area doors, I nearly ran into the man in front of me. He would have noticed me if I hadn't stumbled out of his path. Eyes dilated, lips pursed as if humming, he turned back through the doors and shuffled back in the direction we had come. I scrambled to catch up with the others I was escaping with, hoping they hadn't been turned as well. The older woman waving her arms, "Give location detail, where is she?" from the narrator. Once we made it to the storefront, we could see the zombies lumbering out of the store and into the main parking lot. "Get in my car. I'll get us out of here." I gestured to my car, which was a few steps away. I'd parked in the side lot to avoid traffic. We all had baskets of food and tossed them into my trunk. As I pulled out of the lot, I could see the same thing happening in the surrounding plazas. Even the McDonald's and Wendy's down the street had people waddling out en masse. The older woman had sat next to me and was now playing with my radio. She would hear a note and quickly switch stations. "What the fuck is happening?" one of the men asked, panic making his voice waver. I looked at him in the rearview mirror. He was bald with a bushy blonde mustache. He looked to be in his mid-40s. The other man was black with a mini afros of black curls. "We need to get to our homes," the other man said. "We have to get away from the noise." The older woman turned off the radio. "I'm pretty sure it's everywhere now." She was petite with bright raspberry red hair, and I noticed hearing aids in her ears. "What's everywhere?" I tried to focus on the road, which was filling up with people. "The fucking song," she said. "I think it's a song that's doing this to people." "How do you know?" I glanced at her. "They put headphones on people, so it's some type of sound, and when we got back to the prep area, the music was louder than it was in the main store," she said. "I thought it was the first supermarket I went to, but when I came here, the same thing happened." She was panting, trying to catch her breath. "Let's try someone's house," I suggested. "Maybe it's safer at home." The younger man directed me to his apartment, which we agreed was the closest. We could see people waddling, black-eyed, from the apartment building when we pulled into the lot. "We probably have to get away from large groups of people," the other man suggested. We tried the woman's home, which was in a rural part of town. Her front door was wide open. "What if we go to a park or something?" she suggested, tears welled up in her eyes. I nodded and headed to a quiet park. "My name is Doug," the man with the blonde mustache said, his voice trembling. "What are your names?" "My name is Amy," I told them. We sat at a picnic table, eating the food we had stolen in our haste to get out. My cupcakes, veggies, and dip had been popular, but the sausages, since we had no way to cook them, remained in the car since we had no way to make a fire. We tried finding my car's lighter, but I never had one. Thanks to Doug we had chips and cold cuts, which made this feel like a meal. "I'm Nancy," the older woman said as she handed out napkins that had been in her basket. She also had a few bottles of water. "I'm Andre," the other man said. He was the only one who hadn't provided food, having had a shopping cart before our escape. "Okay, Nancy, you said this happened earlier too?" Doug said, taking over like most men do. "Who knows when this started," she said. "But yes, I saw it happen at another grocery store. Except they didn't bring people forward. People just changed in the middle of the store." "I bet," I said, "they were playing the music, but none of us pay attention, especially if it's not that loud. They looked confused, and I shared my theory about music. The first store I went to wasn't very busy, Nancy said. There was less noise to drown out the music. Andre nodded. We were in a packed store because people were going to barbecues for the afternoon. I didn't even notice the music since my earbuds were in, but it would have been louder in the prep areas where the employees were working. Right. I said, excited that the theory made sense. I couldn't hear because I had earbuds in. Someone must have gotten desperate because people weren't changing. That could be why they demanded volunteers. Do you think they were humming the music? Nancy asked. They were all humming. All of us nodded and sat there in silence. What do we do? Andre eventually asked, taking a bite of a cupcake. Our phones all screamed with alerts as if someone had heard us. We all picked up our phones to read the message. Go to a shelter? Doug said, confused. Nancy shook her head. I don't think us being in one place is safe. I nodded. They could just play it and force us all to listen. They were playing it on every radio station when we were in the car, Nancy said, her voice rising in pitch. That's why I turned it off. I bet they played it over the television and internet. I'm shocked our phones haven't started playing automatically. Why do you think that? Doug asked, looking angry. Because people heard it in their homes, Nancy said, her eyes wide. I had 3 people at my house. They just left the door open. They would have closed it if everything was fine. I covered Nancy's trembling hand with mine, hoping to give her some comfort. We have to go somewhere, Andre said. We might have enough food for another meal, but we can't stay here. We need more food and a safe place to sleep. I knew he was right. We had to trust someone or abandon all hope of survival. I'm going to a shelter, Nancy said. I think we'll survive longer there. I nodded, agreeing with her. Andre looked back and forth at the two of us before sighing. Me, too. We turned to Doug, who seemed in deep concentration. What about you, Doug? Andre asked. Shh, he said, closing his eyes. I'm trying to think of what I heard. Maybe if we know the lyrics, we can avoid the song. We watched him for a few moments, but he started swaying on the bench before opening his eyes to reveal black, dilated pupils. The 3 of us got up and ran as his humming started. It can claim you just by remembering it. Andre yelled once we were in the car and I was driving away. We were all out of breath by the time we got in the car. We left the food, Nancy said. They're not zombies, a teenage boy said every time someone said the word. We had been at the shelter for a day, as safe as we could be. When we had arrived yesterday, we had spread our theory, including that just thinking of the song could turn you. We had all powered off our cell phone, positive they would be the next source of the song. The Red Cross employees decided to play CDs on an ancient boombox to keep us safe. The shelter was in the high school cafeteria. As people came in, they turned in any food they brought with them. We, it turned out, still had some meat and chicken that we hadn't bothered to remove from the car. My sausages had been delicious. Just text people, someone new suggested when we talked about finding our loved ones. Everyone rolled their eyes and reminded them that our phones were going to be turned into weapons. Before we got out of the car the previous day, I'd sent texts to my sister, brother, and parents, letting them know where I was. If they were alive, then they hadn't gotten the messages. None had shown up at this shelter. I asked the Red Cross people to check other shelters. They gave me daily updates but nothing positive. What are they, if not zombies? Andre asked the kid, finally annoyed enough to ask. The three of us stuck together. Sometimes Andre and I would hold hands. Nancy would let me lean against her and put my head on her shoulder like my mother did. Zombies are dead, dude, the kid said, calming down. These people are, like, hypnotized. To waddle around and hum a song? I asked, trying to avoid thinking about the song and glad I hadn't heard much to put together. Yes, the kid said. The song has to be the message. Maybe the lyrics tell them what to do, and the music hypnotizes. Don't think about it, Nancy said, the dread making her sit up and grab the kid. Don't worry. He pushed her away. I didn't even hear it. Songs stick with us, I said, pulled Nancy back to the cot we were sitting on. That's why we learn better with songs. Plus, our minds gather far more information than we consciously know. It's better to think about your favorite song. Or Barry Manilow, Andre said with a laugh. That's one of the CDs we had found on a teacher's desk. How long will they be like this? Nancy asked, calming down again. She'd spent the previous night crying. She was sure her family was gone. We all shrugged. It would be a few more days before we knew. The days passed faster than I imagined. We found our way to the school library, and I spent my days reading everything I could find about hypnotism. Andre and I swapped books and shared theories that went nowhere. After a week, as the food supply got boring, we learned how long the zombies lasted. The ones we saw started moving slower, their waddling became lumbering. Then they started to collapse. The human body can only survive 4 days without water, Andre said. We sat at a window, watching the activity. The school had been designed to be a shelter. The windows and walls were thick to withstand storms. It made it impossible to hear the zombies humming. It's been 7 days. This means people kept hearing the song for more days, I said, trying to do the simple math. I bet it's people remembering the song, Andre whispered. I wonder if other shelters have realized it can do damage. We heard a scream and ran back to the cafeteria. Nancy came running out and grabbed our hands. It's back. Run, she yelled. We followed her into one of the classrooms, shut the door, and hid under the teacher's desk, away from the door. What happened? I whispered. Someone new came in. He said he was done trying to survive on his own, she said, catching her breath. He brought a body with him so they could dissect it in a lab. They die, we've been watching it, Andre said. Nancy shook her head, her eyes wide. The kid wasn't wrong about them being zombies, but they turn into one when they die. They keep humming after death. I was taken aback. How couldn't that man hear it? I asked. He was a senior citizen, she whispered. I could see his cheap hearing aids. I'm willing to bet he couldn't hear it. Those things never work. Andre and I stared at her. We're going to die, I said to them. Nancy shook her head. Not me. I watched her pull 2 small hearing aids out of her ears. Andre scrambled over to the teacher's desk and pulled a pencil out of the desk just as the handle on the classroom door jiggled, and the door shook in the frame. Don't, I said when he scurried back over. There are other solutions. Andre shook his head. No, Amy, there's no other option. I've been thinking about it. If it gets in our heads, we're done. We can find toilet paper and duct tape, I said in a loud whisper. What do we risk trying to find those things? This is the only way we'll survive, he said. You shove this in my ear, and I'll do yours. I put my hands up to stop him. No. This will end, and you'll regret this. You have no idea what you're doing. Doing this could lead to your death. What's the point if you could die anyway? Nancy couldn't hear any of this, and I wished she could so she could support me. Instead, she got up and walked out of the room, confident in her safety. She swung the door wide and I could see one of the zombies in the hall, but I couldn't hear the humming yet. Andre took a deep breath and put the pencil up to his ear. "No, Amy," he said, pity in his eyes. "There's no end that includes hearing. If they keep humming the song even after they die, then no place is safe." I pursed my lips and took a deep breath. I wasn't going to watch him do this. I was willing to take my chances. "No. I can't," I whispered and shuddered. "I'm going to find another solution. Anything would be better than what you're going to do." I scrambled toward the door. As I ran out, without turning back, and put my hands over my ears. I didn't want to know if Andre did what I feared. I saw the zombies and they saw me, but I kept running. I went into one of the bathrooms, hoping to find something that would block out the sound or hide while I came up with a plan. I needed something stronger than toilet paper to block out the sound of the humming. I quickly searched the bathroom for pads or tampons, but there were none on the machine. I was sure there were some with the Red Cross supplies, if I could get there. Plus, I still had my earbuds and I was willing to bet there were noise-canceling headphones for children with sensory sensitivity. I only needed something temporary. Ideas raced through my mind until I heard the door open. Someone hummed as they shuffled in and I ran out of time.
Does this bring you joy? What the fuck is this mess? My darling husband yelled from the floor below. I didn't respond. I don't yell or respond to profanity. Also, I was surrounded by our stuff, and I wasn't sure I could get out of the mess with grace. I smoothed out my blouse, cardigan, and skirt while I waited on the wall-to-wall carpet of our bedroom. I made sure to cross my legs and picked a piece of lint off my tights while I listened to him curse as he navigated the maze I had backed myself into. I assume you're upstairs, and this mess continues, he said, probably at the foot of the staircase. He knew I wouldn't respond until he was standing within my eye line. He exhaled, exasperated, and stomped up the stairs like he was trudging through mud, his steps uneven as he avoided more items. What the fuck are you doing? My darling husband asked when he saw me surrounded by our clothes. He was wearing one of his many tailored suits. I could see the wrinkles in his shirt, and his silk tie was loose around his neck. I was sure he wanted to change his clothes, head down to the basement, and ignore me for the rest of the evening. I doubted he could find the hideous tracksuits he liked to wear down in his man cave. I had already put them in a trash bag and placed the bag in my SUV to take for donation tomorrow. I am trying to end our dependence on things, I said, calm and rational, my smile reminding him that it was obvious. How do my clothes fit into this category? He motioned toward the pile of his business suites on our king-size bed. I closed my eyes and took a deep, cleansing breath before responding. I pulled them out to see if they bring me joy. The way he pressed his lips together and the flare of his nostrils made his feelings clear. Why should my clothes be something for you to worry about? He finally said. I pulled out everything, I said, gesturing around the room. I'm going through everything. He lifted his leg and looked for a spot to put his foot, trying to get to the bed. It took him a few seconds, but he got there and snatched the pile of expensive suits I had carefully laid down. He kicked down the carefully organized piles of my clothes between him and the closet. When he got to the open closet doors, he slammed his hangers back on the suit rack. Do not touch my things, he said when he turned back to me, leaving to search for his track suits. I looked at his feet and sighed. At least he wasn't wearing his dirty shoes on my perfectly clean carpet. My home needs to be a perfect reflection of my inner peace. That's the way I wanted to live my life. It shouldn't be difficult since it was just my darling husband and myself. No children or pets should make it easy to live the life I want and have my home reflect that. Our kitchen was state of the art, with every modern appliance we could ever need but rarely used. I'd meticulously selected every piece of furniture to make my home look picture perfect in shades of gray. Glass, granite, chrome, and microfiber covered surfaces and fixtures. No knickknacks sat on surfaces, everything was stored in its place. Books were recovered to match each other. The technology was hidden. It was all the way I wanted it to look. I hated all of it. I'd woken up on New Year's Day feeling unhappy. We had gone out for dinner. Neither of us had spoken. I'd watched my darling husband get drunk, and then I'd driven us home in his obnoxious, tiny sports car. I'd felt every bump and pothole as I'd struggled to drive the stick shift. I had put him to bed in our perfect room and realized I was miserable. Nothing in this house made me happy. It was no longer a reflection of my inner peace because I no longer felt that. Pet, how did you manage to get all your clothes cleaned up? My darling husband asked me later that night as we got ready for bed. Not only I had put all the clothes away, but I had ordered a wonderful dinner. I took a deep breath and felt my lips curl into a smile. I realized all my clothes bring me joy. He was down to his boxers, and I sighed in disappointment. This man was no longer who I had married. Once, he'd wanted to build the perfect life with me. We'd had plans for 2 perfect children, 1 boy and 1 girl. I'd even had names picked out. We would vacation in the Caribbean when they were young, then we would vacation in the Mediterranean when they were in college, but in the end, we would go back to the Caribbean when we had grandchildren. We would have ski trips, cruises, and our lives would be full of joy. He didn't tell me about the vasectomy until after the wedding. He didn't want kids and, even if I had been willing to adopt, he didn't want to raise someone else's kids. My smile faded as I looked at him with his beer gut. He had the perfect life, and I had to be happy with the perfect house. Keep my clothes out of your crusade to middle-class scarcity, he said, getting into his side of the bed. How much of this stuff really makes you happy? I asked him, turning on my bedside light before pulling up the covers. I wanted him to see how unhappy I had been. I might have just realized it in the last few weeks, but this had been a problem for a long time. I hoped he would realize he felt the same way, and we could build a new life together. Everything in my life brings me joy, he said before rolling over onto his side away from me and turning out his light. I sat in the king-size bed, realizing the chasm between us had become physical. Maybe decluttering our house could remove both the physical and emotional distance between us, and we could find our way back to our perfect plan. Where's my iPod? My darling husband asked the next evening when he got home. Which one? You had one from every generation. I said. Tonight he didn't come into the house complaining, and there was no mess for him to walk over. The frenzy of my first day of decluttering had become structured and methodical. This morning, I'd taken 5 boxes of unused and out-of-date tech to a local shop that recycled them. This had been in addition to the bags of his ugly tracksuits. Yes, I'd made sure to do it well before my darling husband came home. The first generation with the spinning wheel, he said. We were in the office together. I was sitting at our shared desk, putting junk into boxes. He opened the box at the other end of the room and began removing items. I took it to be recycled, I said as I got up and moved over to him, returning the items to the box. Those items don't bring me joy. I used the iPods as hard drives for important documents, he yelled. I ignored him and finished filling the box. I walked back to the desk and continued sorting through items. I placed everything neatly on shelves above the desktop, wiped down any lingering dust, and put pens in a cup that matched the paper blotter. I had already ripped off the page that had been full of scribbles from someone testing pens. The tech I had kept was tucked away in a drawer so it could be easily found when I needed it. "Pet, did you hear me?" he asked, taking a deep breath and exhaling to relax. I used them to store our most important documents. How did a 5 GB iPod get used to store our important documents? I asked without looking at him. You're the CIO of a major corporation. You'd be fired if someone found out anything important was on those drives. I heard him yell with rage, but I refused to give him the attention he wanted. "Where are they, Pet?" he said, and I heard the box contents clatter as he slammed it on the carpet. "I took it to be recycled," I said with a shrug. I continued to work as I listened to him run down the stairs, slam the front door, and start his car. He didn't come back until I was already in bed. I kept my eyes closed, but he knew I was awake. He didn't say anything aside from elongated sighs and groans. When the light went out, he and I were lying on opposite sides, back to back, with the chasm of the empty bed between us. Why did we have such a big bed? I had hoped it would be full, our children climbing into our bed, late at night, to cuddle before falling asleep, safe from their nightmares. He had denied me that, and now I was left with an emptiness I had filled with things I didn't really need or want. "Pet, where did the television go?" My darling husband called down the stairs. I had spent most of the day in the den, continuing to get rid of the tech abandoned in the house. My instincts told me to get rid of the massive 86-inch television he had mounted over my beautiful fireplace. I had temporarily replaced it with a landscape painting I had purchased years ago, one he hated. I needed to figure out a better way to hide the holes in the wall and cables protruding from them. The painting would be adequate while I found something perfect. It made the room feel serene and peaceful. I waited for him to come down the basement stairs to talk to me, bracing for a fight since I was close to his man cave. "I sold it to someone online, and they picked it up this morning," I said when he was in the basement. "That television was expensive. What the fuck were you thinking?" "It wasn't bringing me joy, but the kid gave me $50, and we can use it to go out for dinner," I said. I felt the stress and anxiety of my life tumble from my shoulders and sat up straighter as my darling husband's face turned red with rage. The previous owners had built shelves in the basement to improve storage. My darling husband had commandeered half the space for his man cave, putting up temporary walls, like a cheap cubicle, to set his space apart. He had a second, larger television on a wall, a fully stocked bar, and posters of expensive sports cars. I once had fantasies of finishing the basement for a child's playroom, working up designs to make it safe and sturdy. Then our plans had changed and, other than the man cave, all that remained was moldy furniture, damp and decaying boxes of old moldy clothes, and things we had inherited from other relatives. I had managed to put things into crates and on the shelves. I had organized a furniture pickup earlier that day and all the moldy pieces had been taken to the dump. The empty space made it easier to breathe down here. Now I played with fantasies of a home gym, complete with a brand new stationary bike so I could get back into shape. That television was worth $2,000. You got $50 for it. He yelled as he stomped back up the stairs. Like I would ever go out for dinner with you after this. I felt my shoulders sag as I realized we only went out together when we had to make an appearance. In the 5 years of our marriage, we had never gone out to simply enjoy each other's company or to have a romantic dinner just because. It was always a show, even when we went out for holidays. We had to make sure people thought we were happy. I pulled up to the house after dropping off the last load of donations. I saw my darling husband's expensive sports car already in the driveway. The trunk of the car and front door of the house were both wide open. I got out of my SUV and walked into my perfect home, closing the door behind me. "Petra!" I heard him yell down to me from our bedroom. I declined to respond. Instead, I went into the den to start a fire in the fireplace. I wanted to sit by the fire, a blanket over my legs, and a cup of tea on a table next to me. I looked around the room and saw the armchair I could move. I would buy a new side table that would fit perfectly between the fireplace and the armchair. I could see it all in my mind, and I wished I could make it happen right now. At least I could start the fire. I always had newspaper to help me start the fire, kindling to make it grow, and logs to look beautiful as it burned. I busied myself, making my vision become a reality as my darling husband continued to yell. I took my time layering all the elements to get the fire going. If my darling husband wanted to talk to me, he knew to come downstairs. I wasn't going to rush for him. I was tired of accommodating him. As the fire grew, I went back to the kitchen and made a cup of tea. As it steeped, I went back into the den, took the fire iron, and stoked the fire. I looked around the room, pleased with how much clutter I had gotten rid of. Removing the television and all the computer equipment was the right decision. It was going to become my favorite room in the house. "Pet, where did you take all my stuff?" My darling husband finally came down the stairs. His face was bright red, and he was sweating. In his hand, he held a full duffel bag. I had left his precious suits in the closet, and now he had rolled them up into the bag. It would be his problem to get rid of the wrinkles. "It wasn't bringing me joy," I said, reminding him of my purpose for the past few weeks. "It wasn't yours to consider." He dropped the bag and balling his fists. "It was in my home," I said, and walked back into the kitchen to get my tea. He followed me, stomping his feet on my perfect hardwood floors. "This is our home. I live here too." I slowly pulled the tea bag out of my mug, squeezing out the excess water. "You can keep your toys at your office." I turned to face him, so I could go enjoy my tea by my fireplace. "I work from home as well. You had no right to give away my things." His face only got redder as he yelled at me. I had no right. My anger and my voice rose. "No right? What about the things you promised me before we got married? All the things you changed your mind about after our wedding day? It's not my fault you live in denial. I told you I had changed my mind about a family. You didn't care because you wanted your $100,000 wedding and your $1,000,000 home. You knew what I wanted. You should have called it off." I wasn't thinking as I threw my mug at him. Hot tea splashed on his arm, and the ceramic mug smashing as it hit the wall, just missing his head. "You bitch!" he screamed, his hands covering his face. I grabbed the fire iron and swung without thinking. I slammed it over and over across his head and back, not noticing the blood flying around my perfect room, spraying on the white rug. I don't know what made me stop, but I looked around at the gore as I caught my breath. Brain matter sat in chunks on the fireplace mantel. The beautiful landscape painting was now like a piece of modern art, covered in beige and red. The blood splattered the white rug, but, where my darling husband's body laid, it pooled and spread as the fibers absorbed. I must have driven the poker into this stomach. I could see his intestines peeking out from under his body. Even I was covered with his insides. I recognized the smell of his body defecating. The rug would have to go. I would get online and buy a new one tomorrow. I had already picked out the perfect one. I thought about that rug and the new decorations I would have to purchase to replace what he had ruined. I walked into the kitchen, trailing blood behind me, and grabbed my largest, sharpest knife. I would also need to wash the walls and mop with bleach. He had destroyed my dreams and forced me to fill the void with stuff I didn't want or find joy in. He only had himself to blame. This was all I thought about as I cut up his body like it was nothing more than a Thanksgiving turkey. It was pitch black in the grocery store parking lot when, hours later, I pulled up next to the charity trailer. There were other boxes there, left by people who had come after they'd closed. This was the time of day when people just left the items they knew the charity wouldn't normally take. Tonight, I would just leave this one last load so I could go back to cleaning my perfect home. I turned off my headlights and popped the trunk. One by one, I pulled out the plastic trash bags and put them next to the staircase. I taped my note to the heaviest bag. He didn't bring me joy. This story was originally published in Wicked Women, an anthology of the New England horror writers. It was also republished in #RescueMe by S.R. Marks. Like or subscribe to this YouTube channel for audiobooks and more.
Northanger After Dark. There you are. I was sitting outside the bathroom, waiting for Jerry to come back. I had been sitting here for about 30 minutes while he ignored my texts and phone calls. I considered if I should go to park security about it, but I had no idea where that was. I had just decided to wait another few minutes when he came around a corner. "Where were you?" I asked. Jerry rolled his eyes, but I could see he was wound up and agitated. I was dreading his explanation. It always gets like this. I knew it when I agreed to go to Northanger Parks with him. I knew it when he wasn't worried that I had never really been a fan of anything related to the Northanger amusement empire. I knew it when he tried to explain the characters. I knew it when he bought me a unicorn horn that he wanted me to wear around the park. I knew it when he tried to get me to be cute in pictures for his social media accounts. I knew it when we got into an argument in the line for some King Arthur ride. I knew it when we were removed from the line and asked to just walk away. I knew it when he suggested we take a break and go to the bathroom. I knew it. I went to the security office and told them what I thought about being removed from the line. Did they invite you? I had to be careful with how I phrased my questions. I didn't want to start a fight. It would just grow because he would be embarrassed that we were fighting in Northanger Parks. He was obsessed with his image. It was what triggered his anger and the fight at the ride. He never touched me because he didn't want people to think he had an anger problem, but he would pick fights with bigger guys. Sometimes I had to remind myself that I loved him. This trip was making that difficult to do. Yes, Amy, they invited me. I was willing to bet the invitation had not been optional. They are constantly watching the park guests. They knew where we were at every moment of the day. They would have known where their problem guest was at all times and be able to identify a problem before it started. Jerry had been picking for a fight since we checked into our hotel. Each time someone intervened. I wanted to take lessons from them, it was impressive. Do you feel like they heard you? I know it's frustrating to not be heard. Even better, I got free passes to stay all night. What? I asked. That's not what I expected to hear. Yeah, for the first time, I felt like they were taking me seriously. I told them what I thought about how shitty this whole trip has been. I saw the woman next to me, who was wiping chocolate off her 5-year-old's face, wince at Jerry's profanity. He did not care who heard what. This attitude had once attracted me, but now I knew it was a sign of his escalating irritation. They let people stay all night? I asked him. I could see the woman stop washing off her child and focus her attention on us. Of course, others would want to know how Jerry had snagged something as coveted as late-night passes. He pulled out a card from his back pocket and showed it to me. This is just so we have a reminder, maybe for your scrapbook or for me to put on social media. I don't know. I don't scrapbook, but he would probably spend about an hour finding the best shot to take a picture on social media. I looked at the card, and it was clearly branded for Northanger Parks. It said we could be in the park from 10 p.m. tonight to 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. They keep the rides running all night. I guess they figured they should make some money to cover their electricity costs, Jerry said. Are they interested in you sharing this with your followers? Not yet, but they said we could talk about it tomorrow morning. They told me it's new, so we're a beta test, of sorts. How awesome that they know you're an influencer. He's not really that much of an influencer. I could only assume they just wanted to stop his constant complaints and harassment of other guests. Come on, I need a nap if we're going to stay up all night. The park was practically dead when we got back later that night. We hadn't relaxed as much as I wanted. After a nap, Jerry had spent the evening getting social media posts ready for the morning when he expected to be able to share them with his followers. We walked against the crowds, people looking at us like we were crazy. At the hotel, we were the only people in line to go back towards the park on the monorail. The guards and other staff knew who we were and that we were going back into the park. We were offered morning turn-down service so we could sleep a little. It included making sure the blackout curtains were shut and that a small breakfast was waiting for us. They only picked one couple tonight, the monorail driver told us. It's a big deal to get selected. I didn't realize Jerry was so lucky, I said, smiling at my boyfriend. You should make sure you try the microverse, the driver continued. This is one of the rides that made them consider doing this. The dolls would continue to sing, and the music play all night. It's a little creepy but so fun to go on your own. Some of the staff have been allowed to help them test the night. Why? I asked. To see how much stuff they would need. The microverse, since it's so easy to run, only has one person running it from the booth. You just get on the boat you like and then get off at the end. When we scanned our bands at the gate, we were congratulated on being selected to participate in this test run. There will be staff around, and food options open until midnight. They won't open again until 5 a.m. when the staff returns to open the park, the gate staff member told us. We brought snacks, I said, getting excited for the first time since we got on the plane. Smart move. Do you have a refillable cup? I got one when we arrived at our hotel. It was a smarter decision than I realized. I watched Jerry, who seemed anxious as we walked back into the park fighting against the departing crowds. We had missed the fireworks, but I wasn't a huge fan and had seen them the night before. Jerry had spent the entire show filming them and posting it on his accounts. "Are you excited?" I asked. He was rifling through my bag, looking for a bag of peanuts. "I wish all these people would leave already." "Do you think people will try to stay?" He shrugged. "Even if they do," I added, "I bet their passes won't let them on rides." "That's true. We should start riding them. Why don't we do things that will close at midnight? That's only 2 hours from now. What's so important that we need to do it in the next 2 hours? Eat and get souvenirs. Think of all the great photos you can take of merchandise without kids getting in your way." I tried to focus on the things he had been complaining about over the trip: the lines for food, the difficulty of finding seats, the kids bumping into him and ruining his pictures or videos, and the lines to get on rides. "I only care about riding the rides as many times as I want," Jerry said. "Right, but we have 10 hours before anyone else is in the park." "No, we have 8 hours. They'll let people in early tomorrow morning." I checked the television to make sure I knew how to budget our time. He was constantly watching the North Anger Parks network in our hotel room. I had heard the same music from their movies over and over while we got ready in the morning and evening. Today he had kept it on through our naps, and I had dreams about the music. One rotating screen was about the special early hours they had for each park within the resort. We had initially planned to do the early hours tomorrow morning. I hoped tonight would mean we could skip it. "Do you want to stay for the early hours like you originally wanted?" I asked. "Why the fuck would I want to do that after spending all night here?" "I just wanted to get a sense of how you want to spend the evening." "I want to ride the ride, Amy. I don't want to waste time shopping." "You can do that another time. You don't need food, you brought snacks." "Those are for later. We just ate dinner. That was about 4 hours ago. We should consider something now." "You do what you want. I'm going to get on a ride." I didn't fight, not wanting to lose him and spend the night on my own. I just followed him to the very ride I had not wanted to get on, a new roller coaster with 2 loops and 1 very steep drop. People were exiting the queue as we walked up. "Don't try it, dude," one guy said to Jerry. "They're shutting down for the night," another said. "You fuckers aren't as lucky as us," Jerry said to them and walked into the queue entrance. "You ride this one, I'll meet you back here," I said, lingering. Jerry seemed to ignore me, not looking back as he jumped over sections of the barriers. "You guys going to try to stay in all night?" one of the guys asked me. "We got passes to stay for the night." "Some beta test of something new," I said, shrugging. "Cool. Maybe we'll try staying then. If they expect people to be here all night, maybe they won't kick us out." Just as he said that, a security guard walked over to us. "Gentlemen," he said to the group, "the park is closing." "We have passes for the night," one of the guys quickly said. "No, only this young lady and her companion do." "I can escort you to the exit," the security guard said, nodding to me. "We're with them. Now, don't fight it. You can always come back early tomorrow morning and not deal with as many lines." I walked away from the group and toward a restaurant by the ride. I was happy to find they had burgers available. They told me these had been made a few hours before, for the crowds, and I could tell, when I ate it, that it had been sitting for a while. I wondered if allowing people in all night would mean the restaurants opened more often and more food was made, or if late-night food would be the leftovers and cold foods. I sat at the line exit and waited for Jerry. I sat there for a while and eventually got worried that he had moved on to another ride while I had been getting food. I was ready to text him to check in but saw him running down the exit before getting my phone out of my bag. "How did you get out before me?" "You were behind me," he said when he saw me sitting there. "I didn't go on the ride. I told you I don't want to ride that one, and I wanted to get something to eat." Jerry's face fell, his expression going flat. If he were a woman, we would call it resting bitch face. I knew it was his annoyance. "You didn't get me anything? You probably won't like the food. It's whatever they have left over from when they were open to everyone. You should have asked me. It would have gotten cold waiting for you anyway." "How many times did you ride the roller coaster?" "About 10, but now I'm hungry." "You should have known I would want something to eat." "You can have a pack of peanuts." "I don't want a pack of peanuts. I want a turkey leg." "I didn't see any of those." "What have you been doing?" "Waiting for you." He pursed his lips, and his nostrils flared. I could feel my anxiety spike for a moment. I suddenly wished there were more people around and hoped that he stomped off toward the restaurant, and I followed behind him. I didn't say anything, my thoughts swirling around the possible ways to diffuse his irritation. I opted to just fade into the background of his night. If he could not even realize I wasn't on a ride with him, maybe he would just ignore me. Either that or realizing that he had been oblivious already would make him more aware of where I was. It was so difficult to tell how he would react. For a moment, I wished those other guys had been allowed to hang out with us for the night. "Is there anyone even here?" "I thought they were open until midnight." Jerry asked nobody after standing at a register for a few seconds. "I'm here," someone said from behind the kitchen window. I looked toward a voice and saw a pair of eyes. "They told us you would be open for food until midnight. It's barely 10:30. I wish they would make that clearer." "Hold on a moment," the person said and left the window. A petite woman came around the other side. "We have a limited menu tonight because it's just the two of you," she said when she got to the register we were standing at. "What does that mean?" Jerry asked. "Well, your girlfriend got a burger while they were still available, but now there's only cold food, like salads, left." Jerry made a face. He hates salads. "What about turkey legs?" he asked. "Oh, those closed down well before the park closed." "What else is there?" "Desserts from the bakery that were made today, but you have to get those back at the entrance. The coffee shop is open for drinks and baked goods. I also have some pre-made sandwiches left. There's a ham sandwich and a tuna that was made most recently." Jerry took the ham sandwich and ate as we walked to the next ride he wanted to go on. "Are you coming?" he asked me before he got on the ride. I shook my head and sat at the exit, waiting for him. I liked the easy rides like the microverse. I wanted to coast on a river, in a boat, listening to dolls sing about how big the universe is and how small we are. Jerry wanted the thrill rides that made my stomach lurch and my head swim. The night continued like this. I was even more bored than I had been with the crowds of people. Instead of Jerry's irritation being directed at the crowds of strangers, it was all focused on me, the only other person. His irritation grew each time I refused to get on a ride, or he saw me sitting and waiting for him, looking off into space. "Is that all you do?" he asked at about 2 in the morning after he got off another thrill ride. You don't seem to be interested in anything. You don't want to ride all the rides. You don't want any merch, and you don't love the characters. I'm not the Northanger fan, you are. You're a fan. No, not really. Why did you come on this trip then? You bought the tickets before you asked if I was interested. You hate wasting money, so I just came with you. This was supposed to be a romantic trip. How? I asked. It hadn't even occurred to me that something romantic was going on. I was worried that he had some marriage proposal plan. In that we both love Northanger. But I don't. Now you tell me. How can we show people how much we love each other if you don't even tell me what you don't like? Do we have to show people how much we love each other? I asked. I spoke before thinking, but it was late, and I was more tired than I expected. That's the point of this trip. To show everyone. I don't think that's the point of a vacation. It's to have fun and relax. This might be fun for you, but it's not for me. What would be fun for you? A beach, drinking beers in the sun, bonfires at night, sailing on the ocean. I had never told him things like this. It had been evident since we started dating that his way of having fun was the only way we would have fun. Instead of this leading him to an epiphany, it sank him into a darker mood. Well, you're here now. You can go to the beach when you pay for the vacation. What do you want to ride? I shrugged. Something for babies? Something safe and easy like you. That stung. His abuse was always with his words. In 2 sentences, he made me feel like a child and a slut. I refused to respond, but when he stomped off toward another ride, I followed. He led me to the microverse ride. I braced myself for Jerry's plummeting maturity. He hated this ride. The facade of the ride was a spinning view of the night sky, turning clockwise and surrounded by children looking at it in wonder. The ring of children spun counterclockwise. You walked across a bridge to the gondola boats that fit 4 people. Jerry jumped on one boat, but I lingered, ending up 2 boats behind. He looked back at me, and I was sure he was rolling his eyes. The ride was creepy when it was full of people. These small dancing dolls of children and aliens, on their own tracks, moved through the scenery, a few following you through the entire ride. Periodically there would be screens, something probably added more recently, showing messages to the riders. Welcome, Amy. Bonjour, Amy. Gracias, Amy. We went through the ride once, and when we came back around, I saw Jerry standing on the platform waiting for me. I got up, thinking he was ready to move on, but I sat back down when he jumped into my boat. His mood had shifted again. You know what lyrics I hear for the song? He asked me. Something about sex in the boat. I knew this mood well too. It was cocky Jerry, sometimes literal and figurative simultaneously, who thought he could get away with anything. His abuse could shift, pushing me to do things that I usually wouldn't agree to. Sex in a boat, on a ride, in Northanger Parks was exactly what I expected from this version of my boyfriend, and I silently berated myself for not seeing this coming. I felt his hand grab my thigh and his other arm wrap around my shoulders to pull me closer. EW. No, not in a boat where children will sit in a few hours. Who will know? He whispered after grabbing my head and pulling me toward him. I looked up and pointed to the apparent camera pointed right at us. We can give them a late-night thrill, he said as his hand moved up to my breast and squeezed too tightly. He'll always hurt you, Amy. I looked back quickly to the screen that displayed the message, but it now showed a blank screen. Was that a message from the people watching the ride? Were staff members watching us all night? Are we their entertainment? I'm not having sex with you on the ride, I said, pushing him away. Run away, Amy. Get off the ride and get away from him, Amy. Don't wait until the ride ends. Get off now and hide, Amy. I looked at Jerry, afraid he had seen the messages too, but he wasn't facing the screens giving me messages. I quickly stood up and jumped out of the boat and onto the ride's displays. I ran back the way we came. Amy. What are you doing? I heard Jerry yell behind me, but his voice faded as the distance between us increased. I didn't know where to go. I would see him come back around if I went back to the entrance. We were the only 2 people in the park, so he would be able to find me off the ride. The security people might even help him, not that we had seen any since they had cleared out the park hours before. The cameras would know where I am. I could go back to the room, but he would go there too. Even if I managed to evade him for the rest of the trip, we were on the same flight home and sitting next to each other. I should have thought this through better. Amy? I heard him calling, his voice now getting louder as the boat came back around. I dropped to the ground, behind a large set piece of India. It was dark back here, and I hoped it was difficult for him to see, even when he turned the corner. I could see one of the screens. Here he comes again, Amy. He won't get out of the boat, Amy. Stay where you are, Amy. It will be okay in the morning, Amy. We'll take care of you, Amy. Jerry didn't get out of the boat but kept coming around and around every 5 minutes, calling my name, apologizing for being a jerk, and promising to never do it again. I had heard this all before, but the screens had to be messages from security. You're safe, Amy. Stay here, Amy. Eventually, Jerry stopped coming around. I didn't move for a while, but ultimately, I moved closer to the exit. There were just random, modern-looking dolls there. I wanted to be ready to exit in the morning when security came. They would know I was in the ride, and I didn't want them to hunt for me. I found a spot big enough to sit in, closed my eyes, and fell asleep. Adios, Ashley. Bye, Carlos. Ciao, Benny. I opened my eyes. I was standing in the spot I had slept in. I tried to move my arms and legs, but I was stuck. Then I felt my right arm lift and my hand twist in a wave. My entire body moved on a rotating platform. All I could see were the kids and parents on the boats and the other dolls, all copying the same wave as each boat passed.